College football has a very big problem right now. Actually, they've got several big problems going on, but the one I'm going to talk about in today's video, of course, is the College Football Playoff Committee. As we've seen this weekend, they didn't get it right. The 12 best teams were not in the playoff, and we got obvious results this past weekend. 3 major blowouts, another non-competitive game with Texas and Clemson, and it was extremely disappointing, right? First year, we've got the 12-team playoff format. Thought we could get some close games, but as it turns out, Indiana should have been nowhere near the top 12. SMU, nowhere near the top 12. The moment was way too big for those teams, and at the end of the day, the only thing you can hope for is that they get it right next year. And by getting it right, it's getting the 12 best teams in the playoff, right? South Carolina would have had a much better chance of beating Penn State. Ole Miss, Alabama, they would have had a great shot at beating Notre Dame compared to Indiana. So at the end of the day, I get why Indiana and SMU and even Clemson, I get why they were in, right? But neither of those 3 teams were the best 12 in college football. So there's a major problem. And we're going to dig into it, right? We're going to talk our way through it. I'm going to talk about each of these games and kind of break down more Georgia Notre Dame talk and how we go forward, right? Because there's a big problem with NIL. There's a big problem with the transfer portal. But right now, this College Football Playoff Committee has no idea what they're doing. We've got teams who got a first-round bye that are double-digit underdogs in next week's games, right? So of the 4 games next week, Boise State and Penn State are squaring off, and Penn State's a double-digit favorite, right? Texas, a double-digit favorite over Arizona State. So the way teams are getting buys, the way teams are getting in, it's all got to change. And eventually, I do think we'll see the best team emerge, but they did not get the best 12. And it's unfortunate, but the only thing you can do is hope to move forward. But let's start with that Notre Dame-Indiana game, because, of course, the Dogs will take on the Irish in New Orleans. And this is a solid Notre Dame team. Indiana's not nearly as good as what I thought. At best, they are an above average football team. That's it. They're not a good team. They're not a bad team, but when they're at their best, they're completely above average, and that's not even close, remotely close to the top 12. So they got what they deserved. Notre Dame just pushed them around, mauled them up and down the field. Defensively, I thought they were really, really strong. They rushed for just under 200 yards. Half of that came on one run, but they can run the football. They've got a capable quarterback who, is a gritty competitor who can make plays. I think they're limited. I don't think they're one-dimensional offensively. I just think they're limited with their passing attack with Riley Leonard, but he's a gamer, and the dude knows how to win, and they can run the football, and they do play tough, physical ball in the trenches. I think they're solid on the offensive line, the defensive line. They're really tough to pass on, and I think Georgia's going to have some trouble throwing the football in this game. I don't like Georgia's matchups with their wide receivers going against a Notre Dame secondary that knows what they're doing. I think they've got a lot of defenders who are very instinctual. They fly to the football. They know exactly where they need to be. Okay, that's a well-coached group that's full of veteran, experienced guys who play hard. Now, I don't think they're as talented individually as Georgia is, at least on defense. But that's a well-coached group that plays collective football together, and they're tough to run on, they're tough to throw on, and they're going to give Georgia some trouble. I think Georgia is still slightly better. Notre Dame hasn't seen a team like Georgia all year, but I do think it's going to be a fight, and I think if Georgia brings their C-plus game to New Orleans, they're going to lose. I think Georgia needs to play really well and make plays, especially down the field, and one of these receivers are going to have to make a big play or two, a big catch down the stretch. But I still think Georgia's probably the better team, and I still am picking them to win. But this is a solid Notre Dame team. There's no doubt about it. Georgia wins. They're going to have to earn it. Game number 2, SMU, Camden Jennings, is that his name? Doesn't matter. That kid stinks. He was throwing the ball all over the place. And if you're Penn State, all you had to do was just catch the ball throwing to him defensively. I was more impressed with Notre Dame's win over Indiana than Penn State's win over SMU. And I think whoever wins the Sugar Bowl will beat Penn State and play for a national championship. But I think Notre Dame, they earned that victory. They kind of took it and beat up Indiana, whereas Penn State got a lot of opportunities just handed to them. That SMU team and that quarterback, just the lights were way too bright. That kid was frazzled from the very beginning and just throwing picks left and right. they were clearly not a top 12 team, and Alabama would mop the floor. Ole Miss, South Carolina, they would mop the floor with both Indiana and SMU and probably Clemson. I mean, Clemson lost to South Carolina. So at the end of the day, if we're talking about the 12 best teams getting in, you have to reward big wins, right? Tough losses, we shouldn't really look at those too much. The teams with the best wins show you who they are. And when you have a really tough schedule like Georgia did, and Alabama and South Carolina, goodness gracious, they still have quality wins, right? And too bad if you're Indiana and you go 11-1, whatever it was, and you have 0 top 25 wins. Don't blame the system. Don't blame the committee. Blame your opponents for being trash week in and week out. So hopefully what we saw this past weekend is going to connect with the committee. It probably won't, but next year they need to start thinking, hey, this 3-loss team still looks better than this 1-loss team who didn't play anyone, right? So eventually context matters too. And South Carolina got robbed by the officials in that LSU game. There's no other way to put it. If I were on the committee, I wouldn't even look at that game. I'd look at South Carolina as a 2-loss team. Context has to matter. And when officials take a game away and give it to another team, you have to remember that. That's not the same type of loss. But at the end of the day, can't lose to Kentucky, can't lose to Vanderbilt, can't lose to Oklahoma at home like that. South Carolina was playing better and better. They got better. And Alabama and Ole Miss, they lost at the very end, so I get why they couldn't be in. But if we're putting the best 12 teams in, South Carolina had to be in. They're clearly one of the 12 best teams. Moving on, Texas and Clemson, the Tigers kind of fought, and they made it somewhat of a relevant game, but again, just completely overmatched. Texas just has a Georgia problem, like Ohio State has a Michigan problem. Ohio State may have the best defense in the country. They flat out embarrassed Tennessee. Actually, Tennessee embarrassed themselves. The fans went up to Columbus. The team did not. They decided that they didn't want to play, and they got torched in every way possible. They just got absolutely crushed. It was embarrassing and completely pathetic, embarrassing effort by Tennessee. They looked like they did not belong. I thought they were a top 12 team, still do. They just didn't come to play, and they ran into an angry Ohio State team that just pummeled them. So again, if you have the 12 best teams, you're going to see less of these blowouts, right? The more blowouts you see in the first round, the more you got to look to the committee and say, hey, you got it wrong. You got it wrong again, and it's kind of getting embarrassing. So they need to do away with all. They need to take the system, dismantle it, and kind of rebuild it, because Arizona State should not be getting a bye and then playing Texas and they're a double-digit underdog. They shouldn't have gotten the rest, right? Same with Boise State. And we feel like we know what's going to happen. Boise State's going to crumble against Penn State. Texas is going to maul Arizona State. And then you're looking at, like, why did those two teams get the bye? We've got to change it all. Texas proved themselves. I think they can win a national championship if they don't play Georgia. I think Ohio State could beat Oregon. I think they're actually a 1.5-point favorite in that game. I think Georgia's a 1.5-point favorite over Notre Dame. So there should be two outstanding games next week, and we could see two more blowouts. Unfortunately, if Texas takes care of Arizona State, and if Boise State can't run the football against Penn State, that one could end up being a disaster of a game as well. So either way, not super impressed with how Penn State played, but I do think Notre Dame is a solid quality team that's going to give Georgia a 4-quarter fight. If you think Georgia's just going to go down to New Orleans and run over Notre Dame, I highly disagree with you. I think Georgia has to play really well to win that game. They don't have to play their best. They don't have to play a perfect game to win. I think Notre Dame might have to play their very best game of the season and close to perfect if they want to beat the Dogs. But Georgia still has to go and play and make a lot of plays, and they're going to have to earn it. There's no doubt about it. But Ohio State they're really, really good. They just have a Michigan problem. Texas is really, really good. They're running through everyone. They just can't run against the Dogs, right? It's a matchup problem they have that doesn't go their way when they're playing Georgia, and the same with Ohio State and Michigan. I think it's mental, but Ohio State looks like a completely different team when they're not playing the Maize and Blue, and that was a really, really impressive win over Tennessee. Tennessee couldn't run the ball. They couldn't throw the ball. And Ohio State gave Will Howard enough time to throw where those underneath, those crossing patterns, those mesh patterns, guys were running wide open, and he was able to get his receivers in space to where they can make big plays. And that's where they're at their best. So At the end of the day, we did see a lot of good football from teams, but too much bad football as well, and too many non-competitive games. This is supposed to be the playoffs. This is where the best teams are supposed to rise to the occasion. And it's still tough to see that when you got Notre Dame playing an Indiana team that, again, is above average at best. They're not a good team. SMU is not a good team. And that quarterback just embarrassing effort. Not trying to trash the kid, but it is what it is. Hopefully next year will be a little better. If you're a Georgia fan still, I think you still have to like the matchup with Notre Dame, but it's going to be a brawl, and Georgia's going to have to go out there and they're going to have to earn it. That's a good team that Georgia's facing. I think with the rest that they're going to have and the ability to put together an offensive game plan that no one's seen before, I think that gives Georgia an advantage as well. But Gunnar Stockton's going to have to make plays defensively. They're going to have to tackle and play really well, and the receivers are going to have to catch the ball. So we'll see, but they got to go out and do it, no doubt about it. Thanks for watching. Really appreciate it. Hope next year maybe we'll get the 12 best teams. Probably not, but should be a lot better than this year. Thanks for watching. I'll see you on the website.